Welcome to our 10th episode of Neurodiversity in a Nutshell. My name is Aryan, and today we're super excited to host Olenka Villarreal in our first guest speaker episode. As urban areas move towards denser housing solutions, the need for outdoor places to provide meaningful connection is more vital than ever. Olenka Villarreal is founder and CEO of Magical Bridge Foundation, a nonprofit organization that builds communities through its innovative playgrounds and companion programs by incorporating the play needs of all ages and abilities. Magical Bridge Playgrounds promote cross-generational connections to ensure everybody truly belongs. In 2008, after 17 rewarding years in Silicon Valley, Olenka Villarreal applied her business experiences and education to start a global movement. She spearheaded a team of experts and volunteers to raise funds and develop the first groundbreaking Magical Bridge playground in Palo Alto, California in 2015. Villarreal has now emerged as a respected thought leader and advocate for playgrounds, which reflect the need for play by everyone in a community. As co-inventor and patent holder of several playground components, she's thrilled about how the foundation's work is inspiring a much-needed and truly magical play movement. Since the creation of the Palo Alto playground, Magical Bridge playgrounds are under construction in other Bay Area cities, Singapore, and all elementary schools in Palo Alto. The foundation is exceedingly proud of the recognition received for its impactful work, with its presence at the prestigious World Economic Forum in 2019 as a particular highlight. So, welcome to our show. Do you want to talk a little bit about how Magical Bridge came to be?
First of all, Ariane, thank you so much for that very kind and wonderful introduction. And it's an honor and a privilege to be part of this podcast with you and the Unitopia Foundation, the great work that you do. So, as you captured in your introduction, the work really started in probably over 10 years ago now, and it was with the birth of my second child, Ava. I was working in Silicon Valley in quite a traditional role in Silicon Valley, like many people do. It's business and startups. But when my second daughter was born, it occurred to me that the community that I lived in wasn't really designed to incorporate the needs of a family like mine that had two different children, one with and one without a disability. And so it wasn't long before I recognized that even though I was living in this majestic town of Palo Alto with beautiful parks all around me that actually served me very well with my older daughter, those parks became very unwelcoming and very isolating when I tried to take my younger disabled daughter, Ava, to them. And so, because, Palo Alto is in the spirit of entrepreneurship and innovation, I thought nothing of it to talk to the city about creating a new kind of playground. And to their credit, they allowed me to sort of dream big. And they said, why don't you go ahead and try to design the kind of park you envision for this community? And that's when the journey began to create a new kind of space for every age and every ability.
Yeah, so you talk a little bit about universal and intentional design for kind of like the foundation of the Magical Bridge playgrounds. Do you want to explain a little bit about what this looks like and how did your team of engineers and developers begin incorporating this into your playgrounds, specifically in Palo Alto?
Yeah, so as I really entered this as a non-design professional. My background is both econ and marketing. And so when I sort of took on the task of building or designing a new playground, I honestly really thought what I was going to be doing is scrubbing the internet and finding a playground that I thought was great, and I would point the city of Palo Alto to that direction. There are many, many kinds of designs. I grew up overseas where parks were more inviting to older people, not necessarily disabled people, but I was very hopeful that I would find such a place, but sadly I did not. And so from there began the journey of what I have identified as intentional design. And the reason I call it that is because now I recognize that much of what we did very organically now fits under the umbrella of what is now understood to be universal design. And that is a thought process. But, I certainly didn't know all of that. So I recognized three elements of what I considered to be intentional design as the approach that we took. And I actually invite anybody to take this with everything they do, whether it's a playground or a program that you're creating for school or work. It's the intention to include as many people and many participants as possible. And so for our purposes, it fell into three categories. So the first thing is it certainly started with my daughter Ava, but very quickly moved beyond that into the larger community. So who else was being left out? Who else was not using the playground? I know I couldn't use it. There would be other people. So I found no shortage of parents, grandparents, people with autism. I mean, there were so many people that were left out of the design of something like a playground. So that was the first thing, to learn who are the people that are going to be using the space that you're creating. And then the next thing for me that was very important is to make sure that we weren't including people as an after effect, but we actually included them in the full design process. So once we identified who would make up this community, which is essentially all of us all around us, and every fourth person in every community does have a visible or invisible disability. So it wasn't hard to find people that were left off of the playground design, but we included them. I mean, I included them around the table. They were part of the conversations. What did they not get when they were growing up? What did they wish they had as a play experience? And then the third component of an intentional design approach is just to make sure you got it right, and you keep checking in to make sure, how did we do with our assumptions and how could we do better with each project. And so that's sort of the steps that we took. And um, it's very simple, but applicable to many areas of life.
Yeah. So based on kind of like the three factors that you described, how did like, cities and districts and all of these different like governmental bodies that could have served as obstacles or barriers, kind of fit into this kind of equation of trying to build these playgrounds effectively?
Right. So the first, I mean, the real litmus test for me was the first playground, the Palo Alto playground. Now, of course, I did get the approval from the city to take over this patch of land that was less than an acre. And my assignment was to create the funds and to propose a design that they would then approve. And so, with that sort of kind of clean slate, if you will, I was able to do a tremendous amount of research. And of course, the first most important way to overcome hurdles with the buy-in from city, county, staff is to highlight the pain points, let them know what we are not doing that we think we're doing, right? So we have 34 parks in Palo Alto. Each and every one of them is compliant by law of meeting the needs of people with disabilities. So, as you know, the Americans with Disabilities Act mandates that public spaces and places, including public playgrounds, are accessible to people with disabilities. So, I very quickly showed our city that even though it is compliant by law, only about 10% of people with disabilities are wheelchair users. And so I showed them that the 1 in 48 children and adults living with autism are not part of that equation. People with visual differences, people with cognitive differences. And so I lived in a community that wanted to get it right. And so by highlighting what was missing, they quickly jumped on and said, "Oh, I see. So now keep going." And I think getting their approval along the way was a learning process where I continued to share with them what I was learning about who needs what in the community and how can we serve them. And so once the need was clear, then of course came the finances. I mean, we needed to raise over $4 million privately. So that of course is was a large obstacle. And so the way I addressed that is I joined a nonprofit that was already serving the public of Palo Alto through it was the City of Palo Alto's Park Foundation that I joined as an existing nonprofit. They had been serving Palo Alto, so they were a known entity, but Magical Bridge became a project. So it's important, I think, when you're doing something new, that I'm not coming out as an individual looking for funds, but to align with a like-minded organization that can be supportive. And then, once we were able to find some donors that helped us, I think the key is, once you have that first place, once we open the first playground and could show by example the benefit of having a space in a place like this, it's really our showroom now as we develop new playgrounds.
Yeah, so you briefly brought up the ADA, as one of the kind of like obstacles or like the things that Palo Alto was kind of considering that, oh, we're already meeting these requirements. So, um, as somebody that's, now experienced with, public policy, all of these regulations, how would you attempt to like enforce or kind of modify the ADA to kind of accommodate for the things that you talk about with, Magical Bridge?
Well, that's a great question, Ariane, and I'll use this as an opportunity to sort of highlight, the movement, the ADA movement started here in the Bay Area, and for any of your listeners and perhaps even you, if you have yet to see the really recognized documentary called Crip Camp, which came out last year by our wonderful friend Jim Lebrecht. I mean, he highlights what happened to bring the ADA about and the extraordinary effort it took to get all of these initial policies in place. So I will be the first to thank that group for bringing the ADA into law and starting a very important need for, creating spaces to accommodate everyone. What is an issue for us in general is, do we want the whole industry to meet our standards, which are way above and beyond what the ADA mandates? It's expensive. Most of our playgrounds are so expensive that we understand that that would be difficult for us to come in and say every city should have playgrounds that are super, over the top, inclusive of everyone, which is why what we believe to be important is to have a destination playground like a Magical Bridge as part of communities around us so that people have at least the choice to go to a place like ours. We would just like to see a more thoughtful conversation moving forward about what really is included in the ADA umbrella of services and options. I mean, right now, individuals with autism are very part of our community, and design accommodations are not being made to meet their needs. An example is in playgrounds, many guests with autism benefit tremendously from movement, from swinging, but they also get overstimulated by the noise and the activities. And so they do need a place for respite and a place to sort of retreat from the play. So we have such places, and this is remarkable to me, but given how many people live with autism, the playground industry has not been motivated to create much for them because, again, it's not mandatory. And so there's only one product that is available across the industry, the playground industry, and it's this plastic ball that's called a cozy cocoon where you can sit in there. Well, we don't love plastic, so we thought we'd create something better, something more organic, something more sensory, something where an adult could sit in there, somebody in a wheelchair. So we've actually, for our Redwood City playground, which opens next week, we have our version of a retreat, kind of a hideaway hut. And so that's the part of it too, is that we're finding ourselves in a situation where we're also trying to innovate play components, because again, the bar is set pretty low right now with playgrounds. And so we're trying to show by example that you can do better. And we're hoping that with each new playground, it inspires communities to do a few things just to improve that awareness, I think.
Yeah. So one of the things that some education or like some districts have implemented, in like school playgrounds is kind of separating special education playgrounds versus general education playgrounds. Could you speak to like what are kind of like some of the issues with that kind of model that are some like partially inclusive, but still are kind of like separating and redlining like a lot of these communities?
Right. No, that's so important to us. In fact, it was the one of the first things that I very early on determined. I mean, there are some wonderful organizations around the United States that do great work, and I'm not going to embarrass them or myself by calling them out, but they really intend to do good. However, in my view, it doesn't accomplish what we're trying to do. So they will have a busload of kids, typical developing, brought in to volunteer for an hour with those kids who are atypical or have disabilities. And so it's very, very unnatural. You know, the kids that know that they're being kind of volunteered with know that it's somebody's checking a box. Oh, I'm here to check a box with you. I'm here for an hour. It was really important to me and to the foundation, now Magical Bridge, that the playgrounds we create are truly magical playgrounds for everybody. And on any given day, maybe you'll see somebody in a wheelchair, maybe you'll see somebody with autism, but we are so proud of the fact that we continue to be recognized as sort of the coolest park, or, you know, a park, you know, where there's all kinds of benefits to it. But because everybody likes to come to the same place, that's where the organic connections happen, right? That's where we say if you take away those physical barriers, the social barriers start to fall away as well. And we have witnessed on a daily basis disabled, able bodied children connecting in a way that feels very organic, because they're doing something they both enjoy, and they'll realize, oh, I normally don't see someone like this next to me at a playground. Or, you know, it's a very it's a very wonderful thing to find that inclusion and the sense of belonging is taught just by the exposure of the many people in your own community. Do you know what I mean? So for us, um, we have really made a point not to have special hours for people with disabilities, because that also, in a way, defeats the purpose. So it's a very important part of what we do, is creating playgrounds that are so magical that everybody comes out to them. But if you happen to have a disability, it's very clear that you've been considered in the design.
Yeah. So one of the things that you quickly mentioned was this idea of being able to represent the needs of students with various conditions or challenges. What can you specifically say to parents that kind of reinforce the medical narrative that go against some of the views that you as a parent of a student with a disability kind of represent in a sense?
Um, Let me see. Ask me that in a different way. I want to make sure I'm understanding what you're asking me.
Sure, yeah. So it's kind of like this idea of like representing the needs of students with conditions rather than reinforcing, medical models of disability,
Mhm.
senses of tragedy among students with disabilities. So what can you say to parents that, may not know about, either your playground or the social model or how environments can be more inclusive?
Right. So I think in our messaging, we've really put a tremendous amount of thought into making sure that the messages are not conveyed in such a way that I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought because I'm hearing our doorbell downstairs. That it's really not made for one group or another group. So we make sure that this playground has never been identified as a playground for people with disabilities, or um, I'm sorry. So as people with disabilities, and so when we do explain the layout of the playground, we make sure that it's clear that I'm so sorry, Ariane.
No worries, no worries.
Is there any chance you can pause it for 2 seconds?
Yeah, yeah, of course.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so the playground is designed, when we talk about the design of the playground, it's very, very clear that it's designed for everybody in the community. In our messaging, it calls out that we are a playground for all ages, all abilities, and all are welcome. And so when we make that very clear for the families that do have someone that is disabled, They very quickly can tell by the messaging that we have considered the needs of somebody that might have a visual impairment, a orthopedic impairment. We've considered the needs of families that have a member that has autism. And simply by calling out the fact that we want the playground to be a place that's welcoming for the whole family. So when I take my daughter Ava somewhere as a disabled child, wherever we go, we consider, is she going to be welcome there? And so for many people, the playground is just this great place they can come and play. But for those that do have a disabled person in their family and their friend group, they very quickly know how it's been designed. And, peeling back a little bit more of the information, we describe what we have done, the way that we have designed the playground based on zones, so that somebody with autism can easily navigate, or somebody with a visual impairment can easily navigate around the playground. The smooth surfacing, the ground cover, the sensory elements. I mean, really, we really do mean it, no matter what your age, your size, your ability, Magical Bridge welcomes you and really highlights and encourages that in everything we talk about.
Yeah, so I think one more thing that, is a big component of like playgrounds or, like the destination program playgrounds is like this idea of teen kindness ambassadors.
Right.
Yeah, you have all of these, amazing volunteers. But how do you ensure that, there's no really like wrongful interaction? Is there some kind of like training that happens? Like, what's the process there?
Oh yeah. So and we do appreciate that we've had so many wonderful people come through and help us as kindness ambassadors. Yes, we do have a very thorough training program, but it's also what we call a lot of it is the common sense approach. I mean, we want people to be friendly, we want them to be welcoming. We have kindness ambassadors themselves who have disabilities. Some of our kindness ambassadors have autism. And so they, are the ones that hand out stickers, but just having them experience the playground and some component of the programming is important to us. We find that kindness ambassadors have different interests and strengths. We have those that want to interact with the kids. We have those that like to do art or other programming. And so we just feel that with each kindness ambassador that passes through our foundation, whether it's for a 3-month window or for several years, they really leave with a different lens about the need for more places like this. And they might come to us because they're not familiar with people that have varying abilities, but they leave with a very full heart of joy, understanding that this community of people who is often overlooked are some of the nicest people that you'll ever want to connect with. And it has shifted many, many young people into a career, or, like I started this when my own older daughter was 9. And so I grew up with many young people hosting lemonade stands and doing things. And now they're all in college. And just this last election period, one of the girls that started with us said, "Oh, I'm driving people with disabilities to the polls to make sure that they can vote." So it stays with them. And so we are just thrilled when we see that, the impact of what kindness can do. And I think in closing, I think that it sets such a good tone for the bullying that we see in schools. And being in a place where you see people of varying abilities also limits the amount of bullying that will take place by those for those people by those people, essentially, because why does bullying happen? People are not comfortable, and once they see those of different abilities, they may not be their best friend in high school, but they're not going to bully them, is what we're seeing. So we are finding it very effective as a program.
Yeah, so the three, components that you mentioned earlier, kind of linking that back to, bullying and, systems and circumstances in schools, how do you think, public or private, just education systems in general can use universal design and, kind of create curriculum that can decrease, the feelings and sentiment against students with disabilities and conditions?
Well, so we have specifically in our hope to create more understanding among students at schools, we have partnered with a terrific nonprofit called Changing Perspectives. And Magical Bridge does offer a wonderful curriculum, essentially a bundled program that we offer for kindergarten through high school, different things that individuals can do either in the school community, at the home, on the playground. It can be short, it can be something a teacher does, but there's lots of wonderful ideas that we have been very proud to offer as an idea for people to sort of embrace the most simple things in kindness, and starting the conversations, furthering the conversations that everybody should be treated with the respect. And I think we're coming out of some very dark years as a country in terms of the discourse and the dialogue that we've been hearing. And it's important that we recognize that there are many, many members of a community, and it's when we treat each other with the greatest respect that we all elevate the whole community. And so as it was in my situation, I didn't expect to be part of the disabled population, but with the birth of Ava, I now am in that population. And so it's important that she's included in society. And so we are doing as much as we can to advance that awareness, and the work that you're doing with your foundation is helping. And so as we bring awareness to our communities and beyond, that is how we shift, and we do make it a much better world to be part of.
Yeah. So kind of talking about, long term and along the lines of like the future, you've said that you wish for the words accessible and inclusive to no longer be used when, constructing playgrounds, constructing programs, all of these different aspects of, just society. So what exactly do you mean by this? And do you think it's really feasible in the long term?
Yeah, so that you're right. I mean, I feel we shouldn't have to specify an inclusive this or that. I mean, everything should be created to include the people that use it, which is the community, right? When you go to Starbucks, you don't go to an inclusive Starbucks. You simply go to Starbucks and you hope that they have created an experience for you that works, right? So when I say playgrounds, one of the frustrating things that I came across when I started this research is that in every single guide and equipment playground equipment manual, they would have the beginning would be the age groups, and then they would have the themes, and then the very back of the guide was where you could find the inclusive playground equipment. And I was thinking, that's so strange, because shouldn't it all be designed to include everybody? And so till this day, when designing playgrounds, they will say, oh, do you want an inclusive playground? Well, to me, that's obvious. Of course, you want to have an inclusive playground. I want to be included. I'm sure you want to be included. And so that word inclusive to me is one of those words that I wish would go away, and we would just assume that programs, school programs, outdoor spaces would be designed to be as inclusive as possible. Whether we get it 100% right each time is questionable, but at least to come at it with that intention that we're going to try to do right by everybody that we have in our community. So that's what I meant, and that's why we want to move away from that word as it relates to our playground, and we call it a community playground where everybody has been thought about.
Yeah. So you kind of talked about how it can be implemented in schools and, your bundled curriculum and all of these different things. But in all of society, what kind of time frame do you give, this aspect of just assuming that everything is inclusive, whether it's Starbucks or a playground?
Excuse me. It is going to take some time. But as everything else, it starts with us, right? So it starts with the nucleus of the family. It starts with how people treat themselves in their immediate family. And then that extends perhaps to your friend group and your school community and the playground, right? The playground, that first meeting place where people hang out when they have young kids. it extends to people like yourself, that you've created something wonderful in your high school and you'll be taking that with you into the college years, right? So I don't have a set time frame. However, I think with each touch point, we affect a certain group of people. And with those people come those that will advance our messaging in different directions. And so it has to be a groundswell. We hope right now, Magical Bridge has the Palo Alto playground open, and we get about 20,000 visitors a month. They come from really around the world. And when we open Redwood City next week, that will be another playground. And we have 12 others in development. So we believe that with each playground opening, guests will get the value of what it means to play with everyone. What does it mean to have your grandmother actively playing with your grandchildren because she can get on all the equipment? Or what does it mean if a father who has to use a wheelchair can't play with his kids, but in this particular playground, you can see them interacting? I mean, there's something really magical about experiencing joy, no matter who you are and, you know, what your abilities or disabilities are. And I think we are needing more of that. I'm finding people are looking for that. And so providing more places for it hopefully creates more places. And it has to be organic. I think when you make it legally mandated, sometimes it loses a little bit of the magic. I think right now it's an organic movement and it's happening. We're being pulled in by communities that are actively looking for us. And by example, it's extending the good work we do. I think if we came at it from a legal standpoint where everybody has to create a place like this, I don't think we're quite ready for that. But I think that we're showing by example what happens when everyone's included, and it can be incorporated into any aspect of people's interests and their lives. And as long as you come at it with the intention to do better, you'll always come ahead.
Yeah. So as you mentioned about, different organizations, impacting their, group of populations, their, I guess, target markets, as you could put it. You also talked about earlier how one of the main barriers is funding. And I guess what comes with that is, how were you able to attract millions in funding over these past years? And on top of that, what advice can you give smaller organizations like Unitopia that are struggling with funds, in the status quo, to actually grow their funding strategies?
Right. So funding, it always kind of boils down to the funding. In our situation, the way we were able to get the initial Palo Alto funds, again, it was finding those few first people that could pledge an amount, that said, I believe in you. I believe this is a project that will be successful and I want to be part of it. And certainly, having somebody like that for your organization, perhaps a family whose life you've touched in some way, an organization who you have touched in some way. Sometimes it takes one, kind of what we call an anchor donor, someone that really sees the value of the good work that you're doing. Another good approach for fundraising, and Magical Bridge, I'm proud to say, in these 4 years that we've been a foundation, we have raised well over $50 million for our projects. And part of that has been from direct asks, directly going to people that we believe would appreciate or align with our work. Of course, you can apply for grants, but those tend to be a little more difficult because you're applying sort of with everybody else. A helpful thing to do is to approach your local leadership. I mean, we approached our local county supervisors here in the Bay Area, and they really were supportive. And they also then later felt that the Palo Alto playground was so busy that they wanted to create a place like that in each of their districts. And so we helped them, and they set up a match so that the county, the city, and our Magical Bridge Foundation raised funds for certainly many parks that we're doing right now. But as Unitopia, evolves, and the good work you're doing is in communities and really now around the world. I mean, you have partners that are recognized, locally and globally, and really just being able to sort of underscore the give where you live. I mean, you're doing great work right here. You find organizations and companies that are in your communities, and you identify what the funds go towards. Many times it's easier to take pieces of what you're doing and find sponsorships for them. So if there's a program you need a sponsor for and it costs $10,000, it's easier to tell them, your $10,000 would pay for whatever X amount of hours of volunteering to help these students. And then people will help you if they know that you're doing great work, and I find that that's sort of the moral of the story, is really reaching in locally. We have local people, local philanthropists here. They're easier to get to than a big global foundation that gets hundreds of applications a year, right?
Yeah. So I think we're nearing the end of
Mm-hmm.
our episode, but do you have any last words, last messages to our listeners?
Well, the message I have is how exceedingly impressed I am with the great work that Unitopia Foundation is doing. Ariane, hearty congratulations to you for your vision, for your passion to do the work you're doing. Please consider Magical Bridge Foundation and myself a new enthusiastic ally and partner in your efforts. And I look forward to being part of the connectors that might be of some help to you, either with your work or your finances. And it really just warms my heart to make the acquaintance of somebody like yourself and your team. And I really do appreciate, you are the magic makers, and we so are honored to get to know you. So thank you for this great conversation.
Yeah, of course. A huge thank you to you for coming on and discussing all of these topics. But that concludes our 10th episode of Neurodiversity in a Nutshell. It's nice to, celebrate our 10th episode with such an esteemed speaker. We hope everybody that's listening will come in for our next episode next week. But yeah, thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you next week.
Thank
All right,
you.
I'm going to end the recording.